Thanks everyone for joining the webinar today. My name is Adam Sandman, and I'll be talking today about how you integrate SpiraTest with JIRA. During the presentation and the actual practical demonstration, everyone will be on mute, but we do have time at the end for Q&A, so feel free to ask questions at the end. And please take notes, and if you have anything you'd like me to cover that I missed, please bring it up at the Q&A. I'm happy to spend more time. So first of all, on our agenda today, we're going to go through a little bit of the overview of the integration, how you would use it and why you would use it and what different ways you can use it. We'll then talk a little bit about the different architecture options, because some of our customers are using SpiraTest in the cloud, some are using JIRA in the cloud, some are using SpiraTest on-premise, some are using JIRA on-premise, and there are some slight differences in how you deploy them depending on your architecture, and we'll go through some of that at the beginning. Then we'll go into some of the future plans we have. We've got some things coming along the road which will make the integration with JIRA both easier and also richer. So we're going to talk about some of those. Once we've done that, we'll be finishing with PowerPoint, which I'm sure you'll be glad about, and then we'll go into the actual practical demonstration, and we'll go through how you configure SpiraTest with JIRA, go through some different situations, and then we'll log some defects in both tools and some requirements, and you can see how they come across. That should take about 40 minutes, and then we'll have time at the end for Q&A. So first of all, the use cases. So there's two main use cases that people typically want when they're using SpiraTest with JIRA. The first thing is your team is using SpiraTest for requirements management and test management, but your development team is using JIRA to do tasks and incidents, issues, bugs, enhancements, all of those things, development activities. So you want your testing team to work in SpiraTest to do requirements management, to do test management. When you log the defects in SpiraTest, you want them to appear in JIRA. Then your developers work in JIRA, fix the bugs, add comments. The testers will then retest them, and then they either get closed or reopened and ultimately fixed. And you want to have reporting across all of those different activities together. In this instance, what will happen is you'll typically log new incidents in SpiraTest during testing, and those will appear in JIRA. You can also log issues in JIRA, which will then appear in SpiraTest, and that's often useful if you have testers who might be looking to see, is this an existing known issue? They might want to link a test result with an existing issue that a developer found. So that's why we have the option to bring in new issues from JIRA as well. The other thing we then decided was to simplify things. All of the updates to issues in this case have to happen in JIRA. We don't want you making conflicting changes in both tools and then there being a collision. So once the issue is in JIRA, whether it started life in JIRA or started life in SpiraTest, all updates and changes to it should be made in JIRA, and then we update SpiraTest with that so the testers and the managers can see the status of the issue, can see how it relates to requirements in test cases, but you don't make any actual changes there. The second use case is around user stories, and this is an option you can turn on in the system. If you are using JIRA with the Agile Planning Boards to write user stories, and you want this to come into SpiraTest because you want to be able to write test cases to support those stories, then you would want to have the requirements integration part enabled as well. And that will let you have the requirements come into SpiraTest. You can then write test cases against them, manage your test coverage, do the reporting, and then do the testing and defect tracking that I mentioned in the first use case. Just because you'll have user stories coming in from JIRA doesn't mean you can't add requirements directly in SpiraTest. So we have customers who will often have user stories come in from JIRA. They'll have other requirements be entered directly in SpiraTest, and they may even import the other requirements from tools like JAMA or Enterprise Architect where you've done modeling. So that way SpiraTest can have that golden standard of all the requirements from all the different tools and use that as the basis for testing. So that's one of the use cases we've seen. So the next question is, people ask us is, why do we have the synchronization approach? Now, as you probably know, there are other tools in the market that have other approaches, and there's some pros and cons to that. So you can obviously get a plugin for JIRA, and that gives you some limited test management capabilities. The other thing you could do is have a tool that just has all the issue tracking in JIRA, and there's nothing in SpiraTest. And so the reasons why we have the approach that we have are that we found from talking to customers and prospects that the pure plugin approach isn't always perfect, because you end up with complicated workflows in JIRA to try and simulate test management, and it gets really complicated and doesn't really give you the functionality you need. So people get frustrated with those plugins. And the other reason for then having a synchronization as opposed to just not having the defects in SpiraTest is there are two real reasons. One is we want to be able to give you a completely integrated view of the requirements, the tests, the defects, and that end-to-end traceability and all the reporting that we can give you. You'd lose that if we don't have the issues, even in read-only form in SpiraTest. The second reason is that many of our customers will often have multiple JIRA installations. They have vendors who are using one JIRA installation, another partner using another one, and maybe an in-house, or they've got a cloud instance that they're using for new projects and an in-house server instance they're using for a different project. And the great thing is you can actually integrate a single SpiraTest instance with multiple JIRA instances. You can't have multiple per project, but each project could have a different JIRA instance. So that way you'll have an enterprise view of all your QA and metrics and reporting across all those different instances in one place. So that's one of the other benefits. So before we get into how you actually do the configuration, there's one major thing you have to decide up front, which is where are you hosting things? So there are three options typically. There's the case which is the simplest, which is they're both cloud hosted. There's the case where SpiraTest is on-premise, but JIRA could be on-premise or cloud. Or there's the case where JIRA is cloud hosted, SpiraTest is cloud hosted, but JIRA is on-premise. That's a less usual case. Usually they're both on-premise or both cloud hosted, but it has occurred and we do have customers with that situation. So we do have a special solution for that case. So the first case is the most simple, which is they're both cloud hosted. Now that's great because we take care of that for you. As you can see here on the screens, what we'll do is we have a cloud synchronization service called the Spira Data Sync. It runs in our cloud environment and it's going to connect to your cloud instance of SpiraTest and it's going to connect to your cloud instance of JIRA. It's going to synchronize the two. There's nothing you have to do apart from set up the configuration. Very easy. The second option, which is if they're both on-premise, that's easy also. SpiraTest comes with a Windows service that's designed for background synchronization. It's turned off by default, but you can easily just turn it on. You do need to get the plugin from our website and then download it into your SpiraTest installation and then turn on the service. Once you've done that, it's identical to having the cloud-based approach. The third option is a more unusual case, but we do have customers with this situation. They've got an existing JIRA instance on-premise, which they've been supporting for many years, but they want to use SpiraTest now to do requirements and test management with that JIRA instance, and they want to use our cloud hosting service for this new environment. And they don't want to open up the firewall to our cloud service for security reasons, so it makes sense. And so we have a desktop data sync tool which you install inside your firewall. It runs on the desktop as you can see here, and you have control over it. You can tell it when to start and stop synchronization, but typically you'll have a dedicated machine running all the time, and it's going to go out to our cloud servers and it's going to stay within your network for JIRA. So that way it makes it much easier. You're not having to deal with an IT team and having to convince them to open up firewalls or special ports, things like that. So it simplifies the security and the architecture. But once you've set that up and pointing it at the system, the configuration is the same. So really, once you've set up either of those three options, the rest of this presentation is identical. There's no difference in the two. There are some best practices we've found over the years before you start configuration and setting them up. The first thing is work with your JIRA team to understand how they have it configured. So your developers may have some custom workflows, they may have custom fields, they may want to use this JIRA in a certain way, and they may want to use SpiraTest with JIRA together in a certain way. It's very important to have them on board with what you're doing because they'll make it much easier for you to configure SpiraTest and JIRA working well together to improve productivity as opposed to fighting you on it. That leads you then to decide, what issue types do you want to synchronize? Maybe it's just the bugs and enhancements, maybe it's just the bugs, maybe the enhancements don't need to be in SpiraTest. Think about what are you trying to achieve? What are you trying to manage that needs to be synchronized? It may not be everything. Similarly, what fields do you need to synchronize? The developers may have lots of fields in JIRA that are optional that you don't need to have synchronized, and the more fields you have, it's the more fields your tester will have to fill out during testing. It's also the more fields you have to make sure are configured correctly, and it's just unnecessary if you don't need those fields. So figure out what you actually need in terms of information to give to your developers to fix the bugs and for your testers to do the retesting. And what we're really saying here is understand your business use case before you start configuring it. It's too easy to configure everything and then realize, oh, I didn't need some of that. But before we go into actually how you set up the configuration, I just wanted to mention some of the things we have coming. So the first thing is, based on feedback for our current plugin that I'll be showing today, there are some enhancements people have asked for that I'd like to mention that we have in the pipeline. Now that SpiraTest and SpiraTeam version 5.4 is out, they're going to be in the next. These are going to be in the next update. So one is to synchronize comments from SpiraTest to JIRA. Right now they only come from JIRA. Right now we only synchronize attachments when you first create an item. So if I log a new issue in JIRA, I get the attachments. If I log a new incident in SpiraTest, I get the attachments. But if a developer was then to add a screenshot to JIRA after the fact, we don't get the attachments. So we're going to be adding that functionality. And if you have other ideas, feel free to let us know. You can email them to support@inflectra.com. You can add them in comments to this video. You can call us and let us know. Whatever method you have, social media, Facebook, it's up to you. If you've got other ideas of things that would be really nice, do let us know. So in addition to that, we have two other slightly larger things we're going to be doing. One is we want to make it easier to configure the two. So in the rest of today's presentation, I'm going to be going through how you do the configuration. And there's a little bit of work involved because you've got to get the synchronization right because it is moving data back and forth between two systems. And we've made it as easy as we can in terms of the synchronization service running and giving good information when things aren't set up correctly. But we want to try and make the actual setup process easier. So the first thing we're going to do will be having a page in SpiraTest that will actually show you everything in your JIRA by connecting to it and showing you what information you need to put into SpiraTest. So that way it'll be much easier to find the information that I'm going to show you today to put into the system to configure it. And you can make decisions then about which fields you want to synchronize, which types. The second thing is when you create a new project, we're going to be adding a wizard which will automatically pull in a JIRA project and do all the configuration for you, basically auto configuration. It will connect to the JIRA project, it will set up the issue types, the custom fields, and the mappings and do it all in one go, and same for requirements. We'll probably give you the option to have requirements on or off because not everyone uses that feature. So that will be really good for new projects, whereas the first one will be useful for both new projects and maintenance of existing projects. And then the last thing we're looking at doing is also adding some functionality within JIRA. We've had some questions and suggestions from our customers using the synchronization that the developers would like to see some of the test run information in JIRA. We do put into JIRA a link, as you can see on the screenshot here, and we'll see it later in the application, a link back to SpiraTest so you can see the test results. We also put in the description field the expected result, the actual result, but we want to give a bit more rich information around defects. And similarly, in this case as a user story, it will be able to show the test coverage graphs directly in JIRA when you have a user story. This will still be using the synchronization to move the data, but it'll be adding some additional visualization options in JIRA. So these are a couple of things, and that'll be in the JIRA marketplace, and there'll be no charge for that. So those are some of the future things we're doing, and now we're going to move into the actual live part of the system where we'll do the configuration, and we'll then open up for questions after that. So first of all, just a little bit of background, what we have running. As I mentioned, there are two ways you can do the configuration. One way is like this. You can go here into the custom area if you're using a cloud-based synchronization, and I've got a cloud instance of SpiraTest I've signed up for right here, and that will have an option to point your configuration service to your instance. And what we recommend is setting up a dedicated user. So in this case, we've set up sync user. That's going to be what either the cloud service, or if you're on premise, which I'll show you in a second, the background Windows service will use to connect to SpiraTeam or SpiraPlan or SpiraTest. So it's really important that this login A exists in SpiraTest and B is a member of all the projects that you want to synchronize and has access to those types of artifact. And if we go into SpiraTest and we go into View Edit Users, you can see we have our sync user right here, sync user. And if I click on sync user, you can see we've made it a member of this project, JIRA demo project, and a few others, and we've given it role manager. Manager is a good default role to start with when you're first using it. Manager has probably more permissions than you need, so I would recommend once you've got the configuration working, looking at your roles and potentially narrowing down the scope. But manager will definitely work for initial setup. It's a perfectly fine role to give it. It is important to make sure that any project being synchronized is in here, and also any project that's not being synchronized, ideally you don't want this in this list. It'll just make the service take more time to go through projects that aren't being used. Once a product's completed in both systems, you can keep the products active but remove it from this membership list, and then the synchronization user won't bother looking into it, and it'll just improve performance and reduce the load on both systems. So that's how you would set up for a cloud service. You just put in the login and password, hit save. Now a synchronization service is going to start synchronizing. If you're on premise, it's slightly different. You go to the add-ons and downloads section of our website. You'll get the plugin from here, and there's different versions. Most people now are on JIRA 5, 6, or 7 or newer, so really this is the one you'll need. There are some older versions available. Also, we do have some customers that have customized the plugin. We do make the source code available on our GitHub channel. So if you are looking at customizing anything about how the integration works and you're on premise, we do give you the option of having a customized source code that you can use. So for on-premise, what you'll do is take that plugin, you go onto the server. Let me just log into it. And I'm a Doctor Who fan, so this machine is called Dalek. And you'll see right here in the settings, we have the login and password right here. And this is on the server running SpiraTest typically. And then there's a Windows service called the SpiraTeam or SpiraTest Data Sync service. That's what's running in the background, and that will do the synchronization. So I can start that once we're ready. So those are the two ways you configure it. The desktop data sync is a third option. I'm not going to show that today. We do have some other videos and information on that. But otherwise, it's very similar. Login and password and connect. So once you've got that set up, the next thing is to do the actual configuration part in SpiraTest. And this is the part we're going to be adding functionality in the future to make it a little bit easier. So you go into data synchronization, and you might, when you first start using SpiraTest, have other plugins like Microsoft TFS, Bugzilla. I would recommend that you remove those right away. If you're not using them, that is. If you are using them, feel free to keep them. SpiraTest can synchronize different projects with different tools. So if you are using TFS and JIRA, then keep them both. Otherwise, I would recommend just keeping the ones you're needing. So in this case, it's just JIRA. Go to Edit, and in here you'll notice a couple of different things. First of all, there's the name field. This needs to be JIRA Data Sync, and it says right here, and really that should never be changed. That tells it which technology plugin to use. The only time you might change this is if you've created a custom plugin of your own. The caption lets you give it a logical name. Now this is by default going to be just JIRA, but if you have 2 or 3 different JIRAs, for example, you're using one instance that you're installed in-house, and maybe a partner or vendor of yours is using a different JIRA, you might want to call one, JIRA internal, JIRA external, as you can see here. You can do that. You can have multiple instances of the same plugin, but they'll have different connection strings. So this one is pointing to my in-house JIRA server. I could point it to a cloud-based server. So you can have different JIRA instances and give them logical names that make sense to your business. Once you've done that, you will put the URL into JIRA. Typically, if it's on-premise, it will look something like this. If it's cloud-based, it will be https://atlassian.net with your company name. The login and password is needed. We store that securely in SpiraTest encrypted. And beyond that, there are some other fields you will need, and we'll come back to these in a minute. The only other thing I should mention is the time offset. Normally this is set to 0. The only reason you would change this is if you find that updates made in JIRA aren't coming across. It could be because there's a slight difference in time zone, and so when SpiraTest is asking JIRA for new issues that have been updated since a certain date, there's a slight difference in time, and so it's not finding them. So in which case, you can put in a number of hours, and that will tell SpiraTest to look back further in time. So rather than 2 minutes ago, it will be 1 hour and 2 minutes ago, for example. Most users can leave this at 0, and usually our support team will be the ones recommending certain changes to this. There is the option to auto map users, and that's an important area. If you have users in JIRA and you want those to be synchronized with SpiraTest. So for example, I've logged a defect in SpiraTest reported by Fred, and it goes over to JIRA. I want it to obviously be reported by Fred, and when it's assigned to Joe in JIRA or Sarah, I want that update to come back to SpiraTest. So if you do, you need to either have the logins need to have the same names in both systems, in which case you can say automap yes, and you are done. Or you can say, well, you know what, my logins have different names. We use a different naming scheme in SpiraTest, we use a different naming scheme in JIRA, and we're not going to change that. That's okay, leave it set to no. And the only difference is you'll now need to go into your users, and when you create a user or edit a user in SpiraTest, say Fred here, you need to make sure you tell SpiraTest in data mapping what's the name of that user, what's the login of that user in JIRA. And if they're the same, like here, we could have used automap equals yes. There's no need to have this one mapped because they are the same. But if this was Fred blogs at my company, or maybe it's F blogs, for example, like that, they are different now. You would need to have automap set to off. So that's just 2 different options depending on how you set the naming schemes. If you get it wrong, it will log a warning in the event log and just say cannot find user with this name. Recommend update the mapping. Okay, so once you've done that, you've now got your users set up correctly and you've got the plugin correctly set up. The next thing you'll do is the project mapping, and these are done on a per project basis. And so for each project in SpiraTest, you need to have it point to a unique project in JIRA. And in this case, we go into JIRA right here and we go to projects. You'll see here the projects we have. Now we only have one for this demo today. In reality, you may have multiple projects. So this name in brackets, in parentheses, demo, that's what's called the key. And you'll see in JIRA, they prefix all of the issues and requirements and other items with that key. That's what you need to put in SpiraTest. Don't put the word demonstration in, it won't work. Put in demo. And that's the external key in JIRA. That tells SpiraTest that we're going to use this project to correspond to the SpiraTest project we have here. The other thing I should mention is you need to map them one to one. Don't have one SpiraTest project point to multiple JIRA projects, and certainly, and the reverse is also true. Don't have multiple SpiraTest projects all using demo. Because what will happen is it will try and synchronize the items across the projects and get confused. So once you set that up, you hit save, it's going to then open up these other fields. And this is where I would mention that you want to figure out ahead of time which fields you want to synchronize, and you might want to also customize your SpiraTest instance first. One of the things about SpiraTest and JIRA is they both allow you to customize things. So if you go into SpiraTest, you could edit the issue types, or incident types as we call them, and they're right here. Now these are the standard ones. I haven't actually customized them, but in JIRA you may have different ones. And so if you go into edit the administration section and you go to issue types, which is right here. I just need to log in again. We have some different ones here. So you might decide that I'd rather take these ones and make them the same. So you can go in here and customize the ones in SpiraTest to match the ones in JIRA. And that will simplify it for your users. If you don't do that, that's also fine, but then you'll have to actually map them more specifically because you may have 2 or 3 different SpiraTest types that really correspond to one JIRA type. But we would recommend, if possible, go into SpiraTest ahead of time, make them all the same as the ones in JIRA. It's much easier for your users. Same thing with the statuses. These are our built-in statuses in SpiraTest. I haven't changed them just to show you what it would look like. You might want to go into JIRA and customize the statuses also to match the ones in JIRA. It's not a problem if you don't. You just have to map them and actually we know which ones correspond. And then the same thing is true also with priorities. These are the 4 built-in priorities in SpiraTest. They're not the same as the ones in JIRA. You might want to go in here and change these in SpiraTest to match the ones in JIRA beforehand. So if I go back here, and I go to, for example, priorities, these are the ones in JIRA. You might decide that they have 5, block a critical, trivial. Maybe you go in here and add trivial as number 5. That's up to you. So that's some of the customization you can do in SpiraTest ahead of time. Once you've done that, and also I should mention you also will want to set up components in SpiraTest. We use components and they map to the components in JIRA. So if you are using JIRA components, you also want to make sure that the components in SpiraTest are either the same or there's a logical relationship between them. Because when you submit an issue with a component, you're going to want it to appear in JIRA with the right component. So once that's set up, you now need to map them together. So you go to data synchronization, project mappings, and I'll just go through the fields one by one. So we'll come back to component in a second. We'll start with the ones that are required first. So at the very least, you have to map status and type. Those are required. So these are my statuses in SpiraTest. These are the ones here. These are active. And then this external key field, that's where you put in the ID, not the name, but the ID of that status in JIRA. So I'll go into statuses. They're right here, and you need the ID. Now, where do you get the ID from? Now, right now, it depends on the version of JIRA you have. This is a slightly older version. If you go into the edit, and you see in the bottom down here, you're going to see the URL. It's going to show you the ID of that item. So that's ID number 1, ID number 3, ID number 4, ID number 5, ID number 6. So you need to go in here and get those IDs and put them in here. So, for example, a new incident is status 1, which would be open. If we go to what we call open, it also points to number 1. So that's an interesting question. Why do we have them both? Well, the reason is we didn't change the statuses in SpiraTest to be different. So to be the same, they are different. So we have more in SpiraTest than we have in JIRA. And what we really want is if someone logs a new issue in SpiraTest or an open issue, they both become open issues in JIRA. So we use the number 1 twice. That's perfect. But in the reverse direction, what's it going to do when you have an issue in JIRA set to open? Well, it won't know which of these two to use, new or open. So that's why you have this concept called primary and secondary. I've made open primary, I've made new secondary. So that means when you log an issue in JIRA or update an issue in JIRA and it's set to open, SpiraTest will always set it to this open status. It won't set it to new. So when something's set to not primary, it means it will go into JIRA, but it will never come out of JIRA into this status. So it's useful if you have a one-to-many relationship between the statuses. You may have 2 or 3 different statuses in SpiraTest that point to a status in JIRA. But as I mentioned earlier on, it is usually easier for users if you do have them configured one for one. Okay, so that's how you would do a status. And let's look at priorities next. Priorities are right here. Priorities are optional. If you don't map the priorities, you can still synchronize defects. It just means that the priority won't get set when you do the synchronization. So to do priorities, you go in here, go to priority. Same thing. These are the 4 priorities. We've mapped them to 2, 3, 4, 5. Those numbers come also from the edit link. The URL will tell you. And so when you go back to my original presentation and you think about the different IDs I'm getting, we're going to add a new screen, as I mentioned, in SpiraTest. It will actually have a page that will show you all of the JIRA items, all the ones that are required, all the ones that are optional, and it will show you all the IDs that you need to use. Because we found that JIRA's changed the UI a few times, and so it's going to be harder and harder for us to update the documentation. So why not just make it easier by having a system that actually just gives it to you right away? So we're going to be making it much easier in the future with a new page in SpiraTest that will say blocker critical, ID equals 1, ID equals 2. So it will simplify things a lot. But for right now, we can get it from the URL, and you just put them in right here. And notice that I don't have a mapping for number 1 because we don't have an equivalent for blocker. So if I wanted to map blocker, I could go into the priorities in SpiraTest, add a type called blocker, and then map it to number 1. So that's really easy to do. So we've mapped statuses, we've mapped priorities. We're now moving on to types. Types are required also. These are our types. So if we go back to data synchronization and we go into types, right here, these are the types we have. We're not using some of the other ones, so we can leave those blank. And we point these to the types in JIRA. And to do that, you go to Issues, and you go to Issue Types. The edit link will give you the IDs. This is ID number 1, that's ID number 4, that's number 2, that's number 5. Same thing, and these will point here. So that way, if I log a new bug in SpiraTest, it goes to bug type, issue type 1 in JIRA, which is bug. If I log an incident, which is also type 1, it will go into JIRA and become a bug. But when you update it, because we have that set to not primary, it will update itself back in SpiraTest as bug. So it's the same concept. You could have many things in SpiraTest point to the same status, but you have to tell SpiraTest which one is the primary one. That's the one it will always update back from JIRA as. And so that's, again, very similar to the status mapping. So you've done statuses, you've done types, priorities are optional. If you do them, then you'll get that updating nicely. The other thing you typically want to do is the component field. So we'll go into component. If you go into component, you have to put the IDs of the components in, and these will also map to the components in JIRA. So if we go into JIRA and go undo under projects, and there you'll see components. These are the components, and again we want the IDs, not the numbers. And to get the IDs, depending on the version of JIRA you have, there may be a URL you can grab. If not, you can just sometimes you can just go in here and look at the ID number. There you go. That's ID 1000. That's ID 1001 right here. And that points right over here to these. So we've mapped our components. So that way, if I log an issue in SpiraTest, it will get mapped to the right component in JIRA, and vice versa. If I log an issue in JIRA or update it, change the components, it will reflect back into SpiraTest. So those are our standard fields. That's what you have to do. Now, in terms of anything else you can do, those will depend largely on what's configured in JIRA in your instance and what's required. So these are some sample custom fields we put together for the demonstration. This is more than we'd probably want to synchronize in real life. We don't want a tester probably filling out quite as many fields as this. So I did this more for illustration purposes. But in a real environment, we would say anything that's required by JIRA to log a new issue, you have to map, or it's going to reject the issue. Anything else is up to you if it makes sense. So for example, the environment field, that's a field in JIRA. That's just a simple text field. It can go like that. If you want to map, for example, a free text field, that's a custom field in JIRA, you go in here and you want to map it like that. So how do we get that number? This is a free text field in JIRA. It's in the custom properties. So you go in here and you would go into the fields, and these are our custom fields. This is our free text field. And if you go to this, there's an edit button, and that edit link has an ID down here, and that ID is the ID of that field. This is the free text field. It's ID 1000, 10,000, and there it is. So that tells SpiraTest that what we call free text field is the same as this free text field. So if I go back here, let's try a list field. A list field is slightly different. So we'll go to a multi-select list, for example. This is a custom field in SpiraTest called multi-select field. It points to this one in JIRA. So it's right this one here, multi-select field. Go to edit. It's 10,001. Great. Now if we want to see the values that are in multi-select field, those are even easier to map. All we do is put the names in. We don't even need the ID. So you just put the name of those custom fields. So that way, if you have different values in a multi-select list that you're going to pick from, you just need the names of them right here. And that's your custom property mapping. That sets up your standard fields that are needed plus the custom properties. And for most people, that's all you need to do. And now it will start synchronizing. There's only one other slight thing I would recommend is that the versions. So in SpiraTest, we have what are called releases. And in JIRA, they're called either releases or versions, depending the JIRA instance you have. I think Atlassian has renamed them recently. They used to be called versions. I think they're now called releases. But in either case, we have releases here in SpiraTest, and in JIRA, you also have, if I remember correctly, you have releases, or I think they can call versions. And so that's fine. If you go into projects, click on it, you'll see the versions are right here. If you have no versions in SpiraTest or no versions in JIRA, this is really easy. When you synchronize a defect in SpiraTest and it becomes an issue in JIRA, we're going to automatically create the version for you. If you log a new user story in JIRA or a new issue in JIRA and it has a version and we've never seen it in SpiraTest, the synchronization will actually add it for you automatically also, in both directions. The only time you need to make any manual changes is if you've started midstream, you've already been using SpiraTest in this project, you already have some releases, and you've been using JIRA and you have some releases you haven't yet mapped. They're already in existence in both systems. So in that case, we don't want it creating a duplicate release in either system because it hasn't seen it before. So you can go in and tell SpiraTest that it's been seen before. So you click on the release, and there's a special field called JIRA ID, and you put in the ID value of the version or the release. That's it. That tells it, don't create it again. We've already seen it. They're the same. If you don't do that and you log an issue against this release, it's going to create a new version in JIRA with the same name. And then you can always change it and fix it. But just to solve that problem, just go through and make sure either have one system generate all your versions or go in here and map the two. So that's the last real piece for the issues. Then the other thing would be, do you want to actually manage requirements? So by default, every issue type in SpiraTest is going to come across as an incident from JIRA. And you may have, for example, in JIRA, some issue types that are really user stories, aka requirements. So in this case, we've got one called user story right here. And it's got an ID of 6. And we want that to come into SpiraTest as a requirement, not as an issue. So how do we do that? Well, that's where you go back to that first screen I was on. And in this custom box, you put in the numbers of any issue types in JIRA that you want to come across as requirements. And the reason why we have these listed as custom 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is that our data synchronization system is built for more than just JIRA. It can work with TFS, it can work with Bugzilla. You can have different systems using it. So we've left these fields there so that different plugins can have different things that need to be put into them that are unique to the plugin. And so this is a unique feature of the JIRA plugin that we can say issue types 5 and 6 will come in as requirements. Everything else comes in as an issue. And while I'm on this page, I'll mention a few of the other things we have. Custom 5 allows you to specify link types. And the reason you do that is if you have a link between two issues in JIRA, and we want to create that from a link in SpiraTest between two issues, JIRA does require that we tell it what type of association, and most times it's related is the one you want. So you just put in here, what is the type of relationship we want to push to JIRA? If you don't do that, it's not required. You can still synchronize issues. It just means the associations and links between them won't get created. And if you don't care about that, then feel free to ignore it. And then custom 1, that's if you want to synchronize the severity in SpiraTest with a custom field in JIRA. You just put the ID of the custom field in JIRA that you want severity to get logged in. And if you're wondering, well, how do I get all this information? Well, we have a manual on our website that goes through each of these fields and says exactly what they're for and what they do. And after this video, we're going to be putting the recording of this video on our YouTube channel. We're also going to be linking it to the manual where it has this information described. So again, anything you see today that you want to see in the future, we'll be putting a recording of both the PowerPoint and the actual video of me doing this, and also the manual all in one place, so you can refer to that. So don't worry if you miss it right now. So now that's the configuration we've done. Now we're all set, and all we need to do now is actually turn on the synchronization. So let's go back into services. I'm using the on-premise one today just so I have a bit more control over the timing for the demo. If it's cloud-based, it will be running all the time and I wouldn't have to do anything. And in production, you would typically have this service set to automatic. So it runs whenever the machine reboots or Windows Update runs. So in a real environment, we would recommend having it run automated, and then it takes the burden from you. And if it's cloud-based, it's running all the time in our cloud environment. Okay, so that's set up. So now that we're running, all we need to do is go into SpiraTest. And there's a couple of different things we could do. We could log a defect just directly. So we can go in here and say new incident. And I can go in here and say, new issue found on screen 1. So we'll put in the release 1. Priority is high. These are the only required fields we need. I'll put in component because we have it. And I'll put in a description. We found a bug on screen 1. So I'll hit save. That's saved. So that's my defect logged in SpiraTest. I'm not going to worry about that right now. I'm going to keep going and we'll come back in a minute. And the second thing I might want to do is I might want to do it through testing, because obviously SpiraTest is for test management. And so if I go into a test case and I go Tools, Execute, the release is chosen for me. That's perfectly fine. Hit Next. Save my test run. And now let me go ahead and actually pass a step, and let's say we get an issue. So this is what we should expect to get. And let's say we didn't. So we didn't get that. Get the expected screen. We saw an error page instead. And I put a screenshot of that in. So I'll just take a print screen. I'm just going to take a screen of my current screen and paste it in. So it's not actually the error page, it's just my current screen. Go into incidents. It will warn me there's already a bug we found. So as I mentioned earlier on, one of the benefits of the bugs coming in from JIRA, as well as the ones going into JIRA, is it lets you see any bugs the developer logged, and you can make sure that maybe we have already fixed this. So then I wouldn't log a new defect. I would just link the existing one. But we'll pretend it's a new issue that's completely unrelated. So we'll go in here and say, found issue on the submission form. Bug. Priorities pretty critical, I think. Component 2, say, we can fill some other fields out. I'm just going to leave them blank for now. And that's what I need to do. Hit fail. And that's my step failed. My defect is logged. Hit finish. That's good. And there's my failed test case. And if I go into my defects section, there are my 2 defects. And that says bug new, that says bug open. Now, if anyone was watching really closely, you would have remembered that the original status of this bug was actually new, not open. So it's changed already. And that's because JIRA has already gotten hold of it, and JIRA now has given it an ID. So you can see here, JIRA ID is 72. That's the ID of that issue in JIRA. We've also got an attachment which will give us a hyperlink to JIRA. So if I need to get to it quickly, I don't have to go into JIRA and try and find it. I click on the link, it takes me right here. And also the status in the history did change, because when it synchronized back into SpiraTest, it said, well, actually, we know that the primary type for this issue is open, and so even though it was logged as an incident and new, in our mapping we had said that open and bug were the primary types, so it's updated it back into SpiraTest. So a nice feature is that any bug you see in the status open that you logged as new, you now know has been synchronized. So that's really nice. And you've got the issue ID right here to get to it, or the hyperlink. And meanwhile, back in JIRA, what do we have? So if we go into issues, and I'm going to exit administration at this point and go back into the issue browser. And you'll see here, both are actually, we've already logged the second one too, because it's running in the background. So the very first one is here, new issue found on screen 1. If I click on it, there's the bug, priority, status. I didn't set the other values. I did set the component though, and I did set the version. And there's my description. And there's my link back to my issue. So as well as having the hyperlink from SpiraTest to JIRA, here's the link from JIRA back to SpiraTest, which is nice. Okay, that's good. And meanwhile, while I was doing that, if I go back to my issue list, you will notice that the second one has gone to open. So the second one's synchronized. Even better. So I'll go back into issues and I'll click on this. This is from testing. So slightly different. The main differences you'll see when you're doing testing are the description is going to be the actual description, expected result, actual result, test run steps. So you get a bit more information. And instead of just one link back to SpiraTest for the incident, you also do get a link to the requirement and to the test run. And I did put a screenshot in, so you get the screenshot. So that's very good. So we've done that. We now have our issue in JIRA. Let's say we're going to do something. So we add a comment. So I am having trouble reproducing this. So maybe hit save. Okay. And what will happen is that comment will now go back into SpiraTest. So while we're waiting for that to happen, let's go back into JIRA and let's go create a new issue in the other direction. So we'll go here and I'll create an issue. Here it is, create issue. And you choose the project, the type. So this will be a, found an issue while working in JIRA. So we know it's from JIRA, just put that in. Priority, we haven't mapped blocker, so I don't want to choose that one that's important. I'll set the component, component 3. It affects version 2, and the fixed version, we'll leave that for now because it's not fixed, and that's okay. We can put other things in here too. Description, I was playing with the system and found an issue. In real life, there'll be probably more information than that. Hit create though, that's good for now. And we've now got a new issue in JIRA that we created in JIRA. That's good. So if we now go back into SpiraTest and hit refresh, let's see if anything's come in. Oh, look, by the time we did that, we already have our new comment coming in. So if I go to overview, there's our comment. I'm having trouble reproducing this. So the tester can see right here, oh, there's a problem. We need to actually look at that and try and figure out, why can't he reproduce it? So we do synchronize comments as well as the actual incident itself. And while that's running, let's go back into instance. Let's see if the other one's come around yet. Oh, that's already appeared too. So there's my next one. And so there's my new issue from JIRA. There's the release I detected it in. There's the component I chose. There's the name. There's the description. And there's the hyperlink. So the hyperlink is added in both directions. And so I can quickly get back to JIRA, or if I'm in JIRA, I can quickly get back to SpiraTest. And as I mentioned in the earlier part of the presentation, what we're going to be adding in JIRA is some additional little widgets that will display some of the nice graphs and graphics that we have in SpiraTest already. So if this was a story, you'll get that graph with the requirements coverage. If it's an issue, you'll probably get something around if it's a test run related one, you'll get that test run information so you can see all the test runs and the steps, which will give you a little bit more visibility inside of JIRA. So those are kind of two little enhancements we'll be adding. So that's an overview of the synchronization. Just to recap, I showed you how you would go into the cloud synchronization to do the initial setup. I showed you how you do on-premise with the Windows service. I didn't put the DLL in there. I assume you just download it and put it in there automatically. Then we went through the configuration, we created the plugin, we set the URL for JIRA, we went into the project mapping and made sure that all the fields we needed were mapped. We did a couple of custom fields, we did some standard fields and the component. And then we actually logged in and logged a few issues in both systems and updated one in JIRA. So that's the planned presentation. We're now moving into Q&A, and I already see one question coming in. So feel free to unmute your line and ask the question through the audio, or if you'd like to use the chat, I'm more than happy to read out the question for the group and answer it that way. So first of all, let me just take the question that came in. First one from William was, does this work with JIRA Cloud? Yes. The integration I have shown you works with JIRA Cloud, JIRA Server, and JIRA Data Center. Absolutely. And it works with JIRA's version 5.0 actually, or later with the current plugin. We do even support JIRA 3 and 4, though we don't really come across that much. So any other questions, feel free to write them on the chat window. Oh, hold on, we do some more questions. 1 second. So another one was, is this being recorded? Yes, we'll be putting a YouTube video of the actual presentation and the practical configuration. We'll also be writing up a blog article which will include some information as well. Question from Margio. I would like to sync my requirements from SpiraTest to JIRA so that I can write tasks based on the requirements for my developers, but I'm not expecting any updates to be made to the requirements in JIRA, only in SpiraTest. So right now, as we have it built, the requirements come from JIRA into SpiraTest, one direction, so we don't have collisions. Now an interesting idea where we could allow it to go the other way, so it could be only from SpiraTest to JIRA. We don't want to make it bidirectional because we have found that people will try and do things that don't make sense, like close it in one tool and open it in the other. We did that with TFS, and it was actually very difficult to manage. And so we would like to keep it unidirectional for updates, but we certainly could make it configurable which way it goes. So if you're on the line still, Mario, would that help if we gave you the option to have it only go from SpiraTest to JIRA for requirements? Would that be helpful? And I certainly will take that suggestion back to our team as part of the updates. If there are any other questions, please write them now in the chat window, or if you'd like to unmute your line, you can raise your hand or just unmute it yourself, and I'm happy to take you through the audio. Question from Jeff. I missed when syncs occur. That's a great question. So it depends a little bit on the environment. If you're using the Windows service, you configure it. You go into Windows Services, and one of the values is this polling interval. It's 60,000 milliseconds, which in this case is 1 minute. That's why it was very frequent when I was configuring and logging the issues. So that's 1 minute. If you are going to be using our cloud service, it's typically every few minutes, but we manage the interval. If you're on the desktop data sync, you would need to go into the desktop data sync, and in the window that pops up, you can actually choose the interval. So if I go back to my presentation where I have a picture of the desktop data sync, I can show you where that would go. You see the polling interval, 2 minutes on that screen. That's where you would tell it how many minutes you want it to be. So for Windows service, it's on the configuration file. For desktop data sync, it's right here. For cloud service, we handle it for you, and it's every few minutes. Okay, more questions. Does the import fail if any of the map fields do not match? The import will fail if any of the fields required are not mapped. So if you don't map status and type, they will fail. If you don't map any required field that JIRA needs or potentially SpiraTest needs, then it will fail. It won't fail completely. It just won't sync that specific item. So the sync continues and it tries the next item. And so if you go into SpiraTest, I didn't mention that, so that's a good question. You go into administration and you go into data synchronization. There is a view errors option, and that will show you only the synchronization errors. And I have this set to actually run in trace mode, so you're seeing a lot of things here like audits and information, norm and warnings. You don't normally get the import completed and these things on a production system. I just have these running when I'm showing people how it works. And if you've got any errors, they would appear here. If it's a red error, the red type, there aren't any, that prevents that individual item from syncing, and so you need to resync it. Once you've updated the mapping, a warning would mean something is missing, but we could still synchronize it without that field. So for example, if the priority wasn't mapped and it's not required in JIRA or not required in SpiraTeam or test, then it will log it as a warning. So you know you've missed out doing it, but it will just tell you, could not synchronize priority, need to map it, but it will still have the issue with the other fields mapped. So the import will attempt to succeed as much as possible with missing data, and it will warn you in the log. So you can look in the log and see, to me, is it important that the component field is mapped? Is it important that priority is mapped? And in some cases, you don't want to map every field because it means you're going to maintain that. It might be better to not have that mapped if it's not necessary for your business. So that's if the import fails. Oh, and if it does fail and you want to go back over the old items, which is common, that's what this reset sync button does. We've renamed this a few times because people didn't always know exactly what it did. We've added a tooltip now, which I think explains it better. What this does is if you hit reset sync, it changes the last sync date back to empty, and that tells the synchronization, go back over every issue logged in this project and check it and try it again. So if something didn't synchronize because the field was not correctly set up and you want to go back over it, do reset sync, and it will slow down synchronization for one cycle while it goes back over the old items. Otherwise, it's only going to synchronize everything since the last time it ran. So since this date to the present date, that's just how far back it looks. And that's deliberate because we don't want to put a significant load on either of the two systems. And so the integration is very lightweight. It doesn't cause load on SpiraTest or JIRA because it's only asking for what's been changed in the last minute, which in many cases is nothing. So when you hit the reset sync, it will go back to the beginning. And that's useful when you're setting it up for the first time. Would you be sending us the location of this video and PowerPoint? Yes. It'll be in a blog on our website, and anyone who's signed up through WebEx or through Eventbrite or Meetup or any of the other channels for this presentation will get a link sent to them by email. If you registered with WebEx and gave your real email address, you will also get it. If for any reason you signed up for WebEx and didn't give an email address and didn't go online and you really want it, just send an email to sales@inflectra.com and we can definitely send it to you. It will also be on our blog. So if you go to the company website and you go to Ideas, Blog, it will appear here too. Or About Us, Events, in the Events section, we're going to actually put on a copy of the recording as well. Okay, so that's an overview of the recording. Let me go back to questions. We are cloud to cloud. Question from Jeff. Is the sync incremental always, or is there a full sync once a week? The cloud to cloud is also every 2 or 3 minutes. It's also incremental, just like I mentioned. If you want to do a full sync, it's absolutely up to you. You just go into the system and you hit reset sync. If you hit reset sync, it's going to do a full resync, and that does slow it down. That's okay. Once it's done, it will go back to incremental again. So if you find that you want to do that once a week, you can go in here and hit reset sync. But there's not an automated way to make it do it every week. It relies on you going in here and hitting the reset sync button. Now the question from Bosch was, that was a rapid fire presentation. Our workflow will require customization in SpiraTest, help available. Yes, in general our support desk is happy to answer questions through email, through phone, things like that. If you want someone to actually help you do the configuration, actually do the work for you, that's also fine. We do have some consultants who work for us who can do that and can be on site, or they can be using WebEx. There's some options there as well. So depending on the level of help you need, our free support will definitely help you out through email, phone, so on. If you want someone to come on site, we do have consultants who could do that too. Well, thanks for watching today's video on integrating SpiraTest with JIRA. If you'd like to learn more about software testing, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Have a great day.